The scream was lost in the roar. A sound like the world tearing apart. Mike Tyson turned. His home, his sanctuary, was a furnace. Orange light clawed at the night, consuming everything it touched. The air, once clean and cool, now choked with smoke, a bitter, acrid taste that stung his eyes and burned his lungs. He didn't register the details. The shattering of glass, the snapping of wood, the chaotic dance of flames. He didn't think of the years, the sweat, the sacrifices that had gone into building this life, this haven for himself and his son. There was only the orange light. And the scream. It wasn't a loud scream. A child's cry. It was a thin, fragile thread of sound, stretched taut against the deafening roar of the inferno. It was a sound that clawed at his gut, that twisted his heart into a knot of terror. He saw it then, a silhouette framed in the window, a small hand pressed against the burning glass. The face was a blur, a dark smudge against the violent light, but he knew. He knew the curve of the jaw, the set of the shoulders, the way the hair fell across the forehead. Marcus. His world narrowed to that window, to that small, terrified figure. The flames were a wall, an impassable barrier of heat and destruction, but he didn't hesitate. His instincts, honed in the ring, kicked in. He moved with a speed that belied his age, a controlled explosion of muscle and power. Adrenaline flooded his system, wiping away the fear, replacing it with a single-minded, almost primal, determination. The front door exploded under his force. He didn't bother with the lock, with a civilized attempt at entry. He slammed his shoulder against the door, the wood splintering, giving way. The force of the blow ripped the door from its frame, sending shards of wood and a torrent of searing heat into the night. The heat hit him like a physical blow. It seared his skin, singed his hair, made his lungs scream in protest. Smoke billowed around him, choking him, blinding him. He stumbled forward, his vision blurred, his senses overloaded. He heard the scream again. Closer now. He plunged into the inferno. He didn't think. He didn't strategize. He didn't consider the danger. He simply moved, driven by the instinct to protect, to save. He moved through the chaos, through the heat, through the smoke, a force of nature, his eyes scanning the swirling darkness. He saw him. Marcus. Crouched low, pressed against the floor. He was coughing, choking, his face streaked with tears and soot. He looked small, fragile, helpless against the raging fire. As Tyson got closer he saw him. Officer Cole, leaning against his patrol car across the street, bathed in the red and blue glow of the flashing lights. He wasn't doing anything. He was smirking. A slow, cruel smile that twisted his lips and sent a fresh wave of icy dread through Tyson. The man who should be helping was watching, a grim spectator of the destruction. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He knew then, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't an accident. The rage, a familiar companion, surged within him. It was a primal, overwhelming force, a burning need for retribution that threatened to consume him. But the sight of his son, terrified and vulnerable, held him back. He reached Marcus, dropped to his knees, and wrapped his arms around the boy. "It's okay," he croaked, his voice hoarse, fighting back the coughs that clawed at his throat. "Daddy's got you. You're safe." He didn't know how. He didn't know what he would do. But in that moment, cradling his son against his chest, he made a promise. He would get them both out of here. He would make sure they were both safe. And he would make the man across the street pay. Ignoring the searing pain, ignoring the smoke that filled his lungs, he stood, holding his son tight, and turned toward the hellfire. The battle had just begun. The shed was small, cramped, barely big enough for the two of them to stand without bumping shoulders. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay, a stark contrast to the roaring inferno just outside the flimsy door. Sunlight, once a beacon of hope, now seemed a distant memory, filtered through the thin walls, casting the space in a dim, flickering light. Marcus clung to him, his small body trembling, his face still streaked with soot and tears. Tyson held him close, his hand gently stroking the boy's hair, a silent reassurance that cut through the fear. The heat from the fire clawed at the walls of the shed, threatening to engulf them. Every crackle, every pop, every whoosh of flames felt like a personal threat. Tyson's mind raced. He had to think, to strategize, to find a way out of this living nightmare. He glanced around the interior of the shed, his eyes scanning for any potential escape route, any glimmer of hope. The shed contained the standard array of gardening tools, a rusty shovel, a dented wheelbarrow, a few chipped flower pots. There was a small window high on one wall, boarded up with rotting wood, a testament to years of neglect. It offered little in the way of escape. The sound of the fire intensified outside. The walls of the shed vibrated with the relentless assault of the flames. Heat radiated through the thin walls, turning the enclosed space into a suffocating oven. He knew they didn't have much time. He lowered himself to the floor, pulling Marcus down with him. He wrapped his arms around his son, shielding him as best he could from the inferno. "It's okay, champ," he murmured, his voice raspy. "We're gonna be all right." But a cold wave of reality washed over him. He knew this wasn't okay. This was a deliberate act of malice. The smug, cruel smile on Officer Cole's face flashed before his eyes. This wasn't an accident. This was a calculated attack. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push back the rising tide of rage that threatened to consume him. He had to remain calm, for Marcus. He had to be a shield, a protector. His instincts, honed in countless fights, kicked in. He focused on his breathing, slowing it, controlling the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. He needed to assess the situation, formulate a plan. They couldn't stay here. The shed was a death trap. The boarded-up window was their only hope. He gently pried Marcus from his grasp and stood. He walked over to the window, examining it with a critical eye. The boards were old, brittle, and held in place by rusty nails. He could break through them, but that would be a gamble. The fire would be right there, and the air outside would be filled with smoke, making it impossible to breathe. It was a dangerous option, but it was their only one. He turned back to Marcus, who was watching him with wide, trusting eyes. He knelt beside him, placing his hands on his shoulders. "Listen to me, champ. We're gonna get out of here. But we have to be brave, okay? We have to do exactly what Daddy says." Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Okay," Tyson said, his voice firm, trying to project an unwavering confidence he didn't entirely feel. "I'm going to break the window. When I do, I want you to cover your face and hold your breath. Then, I'm going to lift you through the window. You have to be quick, okay? Understand?" Marcus nodded again, his lower lip trembling. Tyson stood, took a deep breath, and then threw himself against the boarded-up window with all his might. The wood splintered, the rusty nails gave way, and the boards crashed to the ground, revealing a maelstrom of fire and smoke. The sudden rush of heat hit him like a punch, searing his lungs. He covered his mouth with his hand to try and filter some of the smoke and beckoned to Marcus. "Come on, now." Marcus scrambled to his feet, his face contorted in fear. Tyson lifted him, his arms straining with the weight, and pushed him through the window. "Go. Go, now." He heard Marcus cough and start to cry as he scrambled to the other side of the window. With Marcus safely out of the shed, Tyson turned to face the inferno. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the source of the fire, the gas line he had installed years ago that had been meticulously tampered with, the source of the deadly fire that had been consuming the shed around them. The world outside was a blur of smoke and fire. He could see the outline of Officer Cole in the distance, standing amidst the chaos, a faint smile playing on his lips. Tyson spat on the ground and jumped out of the shed. He knew the police were his sworn enemies, but not even that. He needed justice for Marcus, and he wouldn't stop until he got it. It was war. It was war. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning wood and something else, something metallic and sharp, the smell of blood. Tyson slammed out of the shed and into the fiery chaos, his vision momentarily obscured by the swirling smoke. He coughed, the air scratching his throat, but he pressed onward, his eyes searching, burning with a singular focus. Officer Cole. He was the target. He spotted him, a silhouette against the fiery backdrop. He was standing near the edge of the property, watching the inferno consume the shed. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if he were watching a play, not a tragedy. The faint smile was still there, a mockery of victory. Fury, a primal and consuming rage, surged through Tyson. He wanted to tear Cole apart, to make him feel the pain, the fear, the helplessness that he had inflicted upon him and Marcus. But he had to control himself. He had to think. He had to use his anger to his advantage. This wasn't a street fight. This was a battle for justice. He saw Marcus, now safe on the other side of the fence, his small frame huddled against the cool night air, a look of terror etched on his face. He needed to get him away from the scene, to safety. But first, he needed to deal with Cole. Cole. Tyson's voice, raw from the smoke, cut through the roar of the flames. He started to sprint towards the officer, the heat from the fire licking at his clothes, the ground crunching under his feet. Cole turned, his eyes widening slightly. Surprise, mixed with a hint of something else, amusement, maybe, flickered across his face. He didn't seem to have expected Tyson to survive. Well, 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 Cole said, his voice smooth and condescending. Look who decided to join the party. He reached into his jacket, his hand disappearing from view, reaching for his gun. Tyson knew he didn't have time. He had to move fast. He was close to Cole. He changed his course, veering to the right and sprinting through the smoke and flames to reach the other side of the officer. He feinted a direct assault, then quickly changed directions and charged directly for the gate. Before Cole could react, Tyson reached him. With a swift move, he ducked under the officer's clumsy swing and grabbed him by the collar, pulling him forward. He used the momentum to swing Cole around, slamming his back against the wrought iron fence that bordered the property. The force of the impact sent a jolt of pain up his spine. Cole grunted in pain, his breath stolen from him, and desperately fumbled for his gun. Tyson didn't give him the chance. He grabbed Cole's wrist, twisting it, the bones popping under the pressure. The gun clattered to the ground, falling into the flames. Why? Tyson roared, his voice laced with raw emotion. Why, Cole? Why did you do this? His grip on the officer's collar tightened, his knuckles turning white. Cole's face was a mask of pain and fear. You should have stayed down, Tyson, he gasped. You should have listened. Listened to what? To you. To your lies. To your corruption. Tyson pressed him harder against the fence, the cold metal digging into his back. This isn't about you. It was never about you. This is about Marcus. He shook the officer, the force of his actions shaking the whole fence. His a liability, Cole wheezed, struggling to catch his breath. He knows too much. He's a loose end. He was always going to be a problem. Tyson felt the ice in his veins solidify. Liability, loose end, problem. His son. He felt the world narrowing, everything focused on the struggling man in front of him. You knew what I went through. Tyson snarled. And you put my son in danger. You were the one to manipulate the system and put me in prison. He slammed Cole against the fence again, and again, with increasing force. The metal groaned, bending under the assault. Cole whimpered, his face turning a sickly shade of white. What did he ever do to you? He's just a kid. Tyson pressed, his voice barely above a whisper. He knew he had crossed the line, had gone further than he wanted to, but he couldn't stop himself. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He turned to see Officer Cole's backup, with a handgun, standing with their weapon pointed directly at Tyson. The officer shouted something about surrender. Tyson froze, his muscles tensing, but he refused to let go of Cole, holding him like a shield. He wasn't going back to jail. Not again. Not now. Not with Marcus. You want him, he spat, his eyes blazing with defiance. Come and get him. He tightened his grip on Cole, ready for whatever was coming. The fire roared around them, the smoke swirling, the night alive with the crackle of flames and the threat of violence. He had a choice to make. Let go of Cole and fight, or what? Give up. Never. He wouldn't let Cole win. He wouldn't let him take Marcus. He was a father, and he would fight to the death. He would protect his son. And at that moment, amidst the chaos and the flames, he knew that the battle had just begun. And at that moment, amidst the chaos and the flames, he knew that the battle had just begun. The officer's backup stood firm, gun trained on Tyson's chest, their face a mask of stony determination. Another officer shouted to drop him now. Tyson tightened his grip on Cole, using him as a human shield. The metal of the fence dug into his back, the heat from the fire intensified, the smoke burning his eyes. He weighed his options, his mind racing. Surrender meant certain imprisonment, possibly worse. Fight meant risking Marcus, who was watching from the edge of the property, his face pale with fear. He had to find a way to escape, a way to end this, to protect his son. A plan, however desperate, began to form in his mind. He pushed Cole, forcing the officer against the burning fence. He saw an opportunity and acted, kicking out the officer's legs and making him fall to the ground. Quickly, Tyson spun, his back against the fence and his hands raised. He needed to gain some time. It was him. Tyson shouted, pointing a trembling finger toward the fallen Cole, panting. He started the fire. He set me up. His corrupt. His words, a desperate plea for someone to listen, hung in the air, barely audible above the roar of the fire. The backup looked at Cole, stunned, and Tyson used the moment of confusion to his advantage. He darted towards the burning shed, grabbing the fallen gun of the fallen officer. He had to use this momentum to gain an advantage. He had one clear shot and one shot only to neutralize the officer and protect Marcus. He locked his eyes on his prey, his heart hammering in his chest, as he began to charge. The officer yelled again and fired. The shot rang out, echoing in the night. A searing pain ripped through Tyson's left shoulder, throwing him off balance. He stumbled, his vision blurring, but adrenaline surged through him, overriding the pain. He raised the gun with his right hand, focusing on the officer. He closed his eyes and squeezed the trigger. A deafening shot. The officer gasped, his body jolting backward as he fell into the grass. The other officer stood frozen, a mixture of shock and fear on his face. He lowered his weapon, staring at his fallen colleague. Tyson turned, blood dripping from his shoulder, towards Marcus. He had to get to him, away from this inferno. He started toward the gate, stumbling, his legs unsteady. But then, he saw it. A shadow, moving behind the officer, who was still on the ground. Cole was still alive. He had scrambled to his feet, and was reaching for his own gun, his eyes locked on Tyson. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to this one moment, this one desperate act. Tyson knew what he had to do. He couldn't let Cole get a shot off. Not again. He had to protect Marcus. With a burst of adrenaline, he lunged forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring everything but the need to protect his son. He tackled Cole, driving him to the ground. They rolled over, a tangle of limbs and desperation, the scent of smoke and burning flesh filling the air. They fought, clawing and kicking in the dirt, their bodies bruised and battered. Cole, fueled by rage and a desperate will to survive, was surprisingly strong. He managed to get a hand on Tyson's gun, trying to wrestle it away. Tyson's muscles strained, his grip tightening, the gun still clutched firmly in his hand. He couldn't let go. He couldn't fail. He looked past Cole and saw Marcus, still watching, his face contorted with fear. His son. His reason. With a surge of primal strength, he forced Cole's hand away, and in a moment of violent clarity, he pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the night, a final, decisive sound. Cole's body went limp, his eyes glazed over. He was still. Tyson released the gun, letting it clatter to the ground. He looked at his hands, stained with blood and soot. He had killed a man. He had taken a life. He had done what he had to do. He staggered to his feet, his shoulder throbbing, his body screaming in pain. He looked towards Marcus, who was frozen, silent, watching him with wide, terrified eyes. Tyson forced a weak smile, his heart aching. He tried to walk towards his son, but his legs were heavy and weak. The remaining officer shouted, "Stop! Don't move!" But Tyson ignored him. He had nothing left to lose. He reached the gate, unlatched it with trembling hands, and stumbled toward Marcus. He knelt down, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, and wrapped his arms around his son. "It's okay, champ," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "It's all okay. Daddy's here." Marcus clung to him, sobbing, his small body trembling. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. Tyson held his son close, burying his face in his hair. He had faced the fire, stared into the abyss, and done what he had to do. He had protected his son. The police arrived, lights flashing, sirens screaming, but Tyson didn't care. He had done everything he could, and now, all that mattered was the boy in his arms. As the world descended into chaos around him, the one true reality remained. He and Marcus were together, safe, and that was all that mattered. And amidst the ashes and the aftermath, a new chapter would begin. One where a father, forever scarred, and a son, forever changed, would find their way back to each other and rebuild their lives.